Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our reading of The Swiss Family Robinson. Today's chapter, Jenny. Let's get started. Fritz, though much disconcerted by the discovery of the secret, recovered his self-possession, and after bearing with perfect equanimity the jokes with which his brothers assailed him, joined in 3 cheers for their new sister, and when the confusion and laughter had subsided, continued his story. Miss Montrose grasped my hands warmly, and guessing from my pronunciation, I am afraid, that I was not in the habit of speaking English every day of my life, said in French, "Long, long have I waited since the bird returned with your message. Thank God you have come at last." Then, with tears of joy and gratitude, she led me to the shore where she had built a hut and a safe sleeping place like Falconhurst on a small scale. Among the branches of a tree, I was delighted with all she showed me, for indeed her hut and its fittings evinced no ordinary skill and ingenuity. Round the walls hung bows, arrows, lances, and bird snares, while on her work table, in boxes and cases, carved skillfully with a knife, were fishhooks of mother of pearl, needles made from fish bones, and bodkins from the beaks of birds, fishing lines of all sorts, and knives and other tools. These latter, she told me, were, with a chest of wearing apparel, almost the only things washed ashore after the wreck when 3 years ago she was cast alone upon this desolate coast. I marveled more and more at the wonderful way in which this girl had surmounted obstacles, the quarter of which would completely have appalled the generality of her sex. The hut itself was a marvel of skill. Stout posts had been driven into the ground with cross pieces of bamboo to form a framework. The walls had been woven with reeds, the roof thatched with palm leaves, and the whole plastered smoothly with clay, an open space being left in the center of the roof for a chimney to carry off the smoke of the fire. As we entered, a cormorant, with a cry of anger, flew from under the table toward me and was about to attack me fiercely. Miss Montrose called it off, and she then told me she had captured and tamed the bird soon after first landing, and since that time had contrived to train it to assist her in every conceivable way. It now not only was a pleasant companion, but brought her food of every description, fish, flesh, and fowl, for whether it dived into the waters according to its natural habit, struck down birds upon the wing, or seized rabbits and other small animals upon the land, it laid all its booty at her feet. Before darkness closed in, all the curiosities and ingenious contrivance of the place had been displayed. The kitchen stove, cooking utensils, skin bottles, shell plates and spoons, the fishing raft, and numberless other things. And then when I sat down with my fair hostess to a most appetizing meal, she gave me a short account of her life. Jenny Montrose was the daughter of a British officer who had served for many years in India, where she herself was born. At the early age of 3 years, she lost her mother. After the death of his wife, all the colonel's love and care was centered upon his only child. Under his eye, she was instructed in all the accomplishments suited to her sex, and from him she imbibed an ardent love of field sports. From the time she was 17, she was as much at home upon her horse in the field as in her father's drawing room. Colonel Montrose now received orders to return home with his regiment, and as for certain reasons he did not wish her to accompany him in the ship with the troops, he obtained a passage for her on board a vessel, which was about to sail at the same time. The separation was extremely painful to both the old soldier and his daughter, but there was no alternative. They parted and Miss Montrose sailed in the Dorcas for England. A week after she had left Calcutta, a storm arose and drove the vessel far out of her course. More bad weather ensued, and at length, leaks having been sprung in all directions, the crew were obliged to take to the boats. Jenny obtained a place in one of the largest of these. After enduring the perils of the sea for many days, land was sighted, and the other boats having disappeared, an attempt was made to land. The boat was capsized, and Miss Montrose alone reached the shore. For a long time she lay upon the sand, almost inanimate, but reviving sufficiently to move, she at length obtained some shellfish, and by degrees recovered her strength. From that time forth, until I appeared, she never set eyes upon a human being. To attract any passing vessel and obtain assistance, however, she kept a beacon continually blazing at the end of the reef, and with the same purpose in view, attached missives to the feet of any birds she could take alive in her snares. The albatross, she told me, she had kept for some time and partially tamed, but as it was in the habit of making long excursions on its own account, she conceived the idea of sending it also with a message that should it by chance be seen and taken alive, it might return with an answer. Our supper was over, and at length, both wearied out with the anxieties and excitement of the day, we retired to rest, she to her leafy bower, and I to sleep in the hut below. Next morning, having packed our belongings in the kayak, we both went on board. Bidding adieu to her well-known bay, she took her seat before me, and I made for home. We should have reached Rockburg this evening had not an accident occurred to our skiff, and compelled us to put it at this island. The boat was scarcely repaired when I heard your first shots. I instantly disguised myself, and never doubting that Malay pirates were near, came forth to reconnoiter. Glad indeed I was to find my fears ungrounded. All had listened attentively to Fritz's story, but now a dreadful yawn from Franz, followed by others from Jack, Ernest, and Fritz, and a great desire on my own part to follow their example, warned me that it was time to dismiss the party for the night. Fritz retired to his kayak, the boys and I to the deck of the yacht, and the remainder of the night passed quietly. Next morning, as we assembled for breakfast, I took the opportunity of begging Miss Montrose no longer to attempt to continue her disguise, but to allow us to address her in her real character. Jenny smiled, for she had noticed as the young men met her when she came from the cabin a great alteration in their manner, and had at once seen that her secret was guessed. After all, she said, I need not be ashamed of this attire. It has been my only costume for the last 3 years, and in any other I should have been unable to manage all the work which, during that time, had been necessary. Our pleasant meal over, I prepared to start for home, but Fritz reminded me of the cachalot. Although he confessed he should not care to repeat the operation of cutting up a whale, he thought it would be a pity to lose such a chance of obtaining a supply of spermaceti. I fully agreed with him. Embarking, we quickly reached the sandbank on which the monster lay. No sooner did we come near than the dogs leaped ashore, and before we could follow, rushed round to the other side of the great beast. Snarling, growling, and howling ensued, and when we reached the spot, we found a terrific combat going on. A pack of wolves were disputing fiercely with the dogs, their right to the prey. Our appearance, however, quickly settled the matter. Two of the brutes already lay dead, and those that now escaped our guns galloped off. Among the pack were a few jackals, and no sooner did Coco catch sight of these, his relations, than suddenly, attracted by his instinct, he left his master's side and, in spite of our shouts and cries, joined them and disappeared into the forest. As it would have been useless and dangerous to attempt to follow the deserter into the woods, we let him alone, trusting that he would return before we again embarked. Fritz then climbed up the mountain of flesh and with his hatchet quickly laid open the huge skull. Jack and Franz joined him, Ernest having remained on the island where we had left the mother and Jenny, and with buckets assisted him to bail out the spermaceti. The few vessels we possessed were soon full, and having stored them in the yacht, we once more embarked and arrived at the little island shortly before the dinner hour. A capital meal had been prepared for us, and when we had made ourselves presentable, we sat down to it and related our adventures. The account of Coco's desertion was received with exclamations of surprise and sorrow. "Yet," said Jenny after a time, "I do not think you should despair of his recovery, for animals in their native state seldom care to allow those that have been once domesticated to consort with them. My poor albatross, even though he was never thoroughly tamed, and certainly did finally desert me, yet used to return at intervals. I am pretty sure that were you, Jack, to search the wood early tomorrow morning, you would find your pet only too willing to come back to civilized life. Or, if you like, I will go myself and find him, for I should immensely like to have a paddle in the kayak all by myself." Jack was delighted at the former suggestion, and though he would not listen for a moment to Jenny's request to be allowed to go alone, he agreed if she cared for the fun of an early cruise to accompany her in the canoe next morning, and to return to the yacht in time to start for Rockburg. At sunrise they were off, armed with bait in the shape of meat and biscuit, and a muzzle and chain which Jack had manufactured in the evening to punish the runaway for his offences, should they catch him. Arrived at the sandbank, they landed, after entering the forest and shouting, "Coco! Coco!" till the woods rang again. They presently espied the truant, slouching disconsolately toward them, looking very miserable and heartily ashamed of himself. With torn ears and coat ruffled and dirty, he sneaked up. There was no need to use the bait to entice him. When the poor beast thus came unhappy and begging forgiveness, Jack had not the heart to degrade him further with the muzzle and chain. He had evidently attempted to join his wild brethren, and by them had been worried, harassed, and treated as no true jackal. As Jenny had foretold, he was now only too glad to return to bondage and to comfort. All was now bustle and activity, and breakfast over, we went aboard the yacht. Fritz and Jack stepped into the canoe, and we soon left Fair Isle and Pearl Bay far behind. The morning was delightful. The sea, except for the slight ripple raised by the gentle breeze wafting us homeward, was perfectly calm. Slowly and contentedly we glided on through the wonders of the splendid archway, threaded our passage among the rocks and shoals, and passed out to the open sea. So slowly did we make our way that the occupants of the kayak announced that they could not wait for us. When they had once piloted us out, from among the shoals and reefs, and plied their paddles to such good purpose that they were soon out of sight. Cape Pugnose was in due time passed, however, and Shark Island hove in sight. With great astonishment, Jenny gazed at our watchtower with its guardhouse, the fierce-looking guns and the waving flag upon the heights. We landed that she might visit the fortification, displaying all our arrangements with great pride. When they had been sufficiently admired, we again embarked and steered towards Safety Bay. On reaching the entrance, a grand salute of 12 shots welcomed us and our fair guest to Rockburg. Not pleased with the even number, however, Ernest insisted upon playing with 13 guns, an odd number being, he declared, absolutely necessary for form's sake. As we neared the quay, Fritz and Jack stood ready to receive us, and with true politeness, handed their mother and Jenny ashore. They turned and led the way to the house through the gardens, orchards, and shrubberies which lay on the rising ground that sloped gently upward to our dwelling. Jenny's surprise was changed to wonder as she neared the villa itself, its broad, shady balcony, its fountain sparkling in the sun, the dovecots, the pigeons wheeling above, and the bright, fresh creepers twined round the columns delighted her. She could scarcely believe that she was still far from any civilized nation, and that she was among a family wrecked like herself upon a lonely coast. My amazement, however, fully equaled that of my new daughter when, beneath the shade of the veranda, I saw a table laid out with a delicious luncheon. All our china, silver, and glass had been called into requisition and was ranged upon the spotless damask cloth. Wine sparkled in the decanters. Splendid pineapples, oranges, guavas, apples, and pears, resting on cool green leaves, lay heaped in pyramids. A haunch of venison, cold, fowl, hams, and tongues occupied the ends and sides of the table, while in the center rose a vase of gay flowers, surrounded by bowls of milk and great jugs of mead. It was indeed a perfect feast, and the heartiness of the welcome brought tears of joy into the lovely eyes of the fair girl in whose honor it had been devised. All were soon ready to sit down, and Jenny, looking prettier than ever in the dress for which she had exchanged her sailor suit, took the place of honor between the mother and me. Ernest and Franz also seated themselves, but nothing would induce Fritz and Jack to follow their example. They considered themselves our entertainers, and waited upon us most attentively, carving the joints, filling our glasses, and changing the plates. For, as Jack declared to Miss Montrose, the servants had all run away in our absence, and for the next day or two, perhaps we should be obliged to wait upon ourselves. When the banquet was over and the waiters had satisfied their appetites, they joined their brothers and with them displayed all the wonders of Rockburg to their new sister. To the house, cave, stables, gardens, fields, and boathouses, to one after the other did they lead her. Not a corner would they have left unnoticed, had not the mother, fearing they would tire the poor girl out, come to the rescue and led her back to the house. On the following day, after an early breakfast, we started while it was yet cool for Falconhurst, and as I knew that repairs and arrangements for the coming winter would be necessary and would detain us for several days, we took with us a supply of tools, as well as baskets of provisions and other things essential to our comfort. The whole of our stud, excepting the ostrich, were in their paddocks, near the tree, but Jack, saying that his mother and Jenny really must not walk the whole way to the great amusement of the latter, leaped on Hurricane and fled away in front of us. Before we had accomplished 1/4 of the distance, we heard the thundering tread of many feet galloping down the avenue, and presently espied our motley group of steeds being driven furiously toward us. Storm, Lightfoot, Swift, Grumble, Stentor, Arrow, and Dart were there, with Jack on his fleet two-legged courser at their heels. At his saddle bow hung a cluster of saddles and bridles, the bits all jangling and clanking, adding to the din and confusion and urging on the excited animals, who thoroughly entered into the fun, and with tail in the air, ears back, and heels ever and anon thrown playfully out, seemed about to overwhelm us. We stepped aside to shelter ourselves behind the trees from the furious onset, but a shout from Fritz brought the whole herd to a sudden halt, and Jack spurred toward us. Which of the cattle shall we saddle for you, Jenny? He shouted. They're all as gentle as lambs and as active as cats. Every one has been ridden by my mother and knows what a side saddle means, so you can't go wrong. To his great delight, Jenny quickly showed her appreciation of the merits of the steeds by picking out Dart, the fleetest and most spirited in the whole stud. The ostrich was then relieved of his unusual burden. The animals were speedily equipped, and Lightfoot bearing the baskets and hampers, the whole party mounted and trotted forward. Jenny was delighted with her mount, and henceforth he was reserved for her special use. The work at Falconhurst, as I had expected, occupied us for some time, and it was a week before we could again return to Rockburg. Yet the time passed pleasantly, for though the young men were busy from morning to night, the presence of their new companion, her lively spirits and gay conversation, kept them in constant good humor.